Alright tubes, got something pretty interesting here for you today. I got my dash cam laid out here, and this isn't an unboxing or anything. I've actually had this for quite some time. It's made by a company called Wicked HD. There's a number of different ones that they have now. I'm pretty sure that this one is just the plain G1W. But in any case, this isn't really going to be a review. I will just say real quick, if you're just a subscriber watching this and you don't have a dash cam, I highly recommend it. I can't really even say how important a dash cam is, because there are many situations out there that can arise where if you don't have a dash cam, you're not going to have any way to defend yourself if you don't have a witness or that sort of thing in a traffic accident or any number of different things that could happen, you know, while you're in the car. Either way, I've had this thing for about 3 years, and it's pretty much performed flawlessly for me in that time. It does everything that I want it to do. But the one thing that happened to it, I would say probably 2 weeks ago, I had it in my truck, and I noticed that the battery charging light was kind of acting funny. And then the other thing I noticed is that as soon as I shut the truck off, the camera would turn off. And so I figured it probably had something to do with the battery. I mean, these batteries go through a lot. They sit in hot cars and cold cars all the time. They're always being charged and overcharged, undercharged, every other thing. So I figured there was probably a problem with the battery. And so I decided to do some research here. As it turns out, the charging circuit and the battery are integrated into one. So it's not like one or the other failed. It's just all one piece. And the other thing I found out is that some of these cameras actually have supercapacitors in them instead of batteries. Like the G1W-C is the capacitor version. Instead of a battery, it has a supercapacitor. And so I decided, well, I might as well, instead of putting another battery in this thing and just having the same thing happen, I wonder if I could actually put a capacitor in it. And as it turns out, you can. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this camera apart. Now, you might need a screwdriver to do this, but I'm pretty sure that I can actually do it without a screwdriver. So basically, if you look at the camera, there's a little lip that runs all the way around the edge, and that'll actually allow the camera to be separated if you pull apart at that lip. So as you can see here, the camera will separate, and you have to leave this thing connected because there's wires connecting it, but it's okay because you don't really need to get that out of your way. So what we'll do here is I'm just going to set this kind of on there like that, and that gives us access to the battery here. Now the battery, we should be able to pull out of here. It's kind of just stuck, it's kind of like glued. So we'll pull this out of the way, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some wire cutters, and I'm just going to snip these leads off right at the battery. Alright, so the next step is going to be simply soldering in the capacitor where the battery used to be. And this is going to be really easy since we cut the leads off real close to the battery. So that way we have leads already soldered to the circuit board. So there's going to be no need for soldering to the circuit board itself. So what I've went ahead and done already is strip the wires that are going to be soldered to the capacitor. So right now I'm going to go ahead and tin those wires. Next, I'll go ahead and tin both leads of the capacitor itself. Now that I've done that, I'll simply solder the capacitor to the leads. The positive lead of the capacitor is the one with the longer lead. Alright, now what I'll do is I just double check the connections just to be sure that I soldered the right wires to the right side of the capacitor. And once again, your black wire is your negative, so that should go to the shorter lead, and your red wire is the positive, which should go to the longer lead. And since we're correct here, I'm going to wrap the whole capacitor in electrical tape. That way there's no chance of anything shorting out. So now that that's done, I'm just going to take the capacitor and set it back on that little sticky part where the battery used to be. And tuck our wires down out of the way here. And now we should be ready to put this cover back on. So we'll take this, put it back in place, make sure everything's lined up, and then it'll just snap into place. Just go around the camera, make sure there's no open spaces, everyone's snapped in, and now the camera itself is back together. Alright, the next thing we have to do with this is upgrade the firmware. Now the reason we have to do this is because the camera is going to operate slightly different with the supercapacitor installed. When we had it running on battery power, what would happen is if you cut power to the camera, it would continue recording for a brief period of time running on battery power. And what that would do is that would allow it to stop recording, save the video file, and then shut down. What will happen is with the capacitor is as soon as you cut power to the camera, it'll shut off. Now, if you did this with the old firmware, the last file that you were recording would become corrupted. However, the new firmware allows the camera to do what's called an instant off or instant shutdown or something along the lines of that. Either way, it'll save that last file immediately as soon as power is cut to it and then shut down. So you won't be able to use the camera on battery anymore, like for playback or setup or anything like that. But what the capacitor will do is it will still save all of your settings, your time, your date, and everything like that. Upgrading the firmware is very easy. The first thing we have to do is download it, and so I'll put this link in the description. It takes you to a Google Drive file, and so all we're going to do is we're going to click download here and download that. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our memory card that we use for the camera, or any memory card. It doesn't have to be the one that you always use, but we're going to plug it into the computer, and then we're going to format it. Now, formatting is pretty easy. Most people probably know how to do this already, but if you're not familiar with the process, all you do is when your card pops up on your computer, you're going to right click on it. This is in Windows. If you're using a Mac, I'm sorry, but I don't know how to help you. But you'll right click on it, go down to Format here, and this little window will pop up. And when that window pops up, you can change some settings here, but I always just leave them at the default. Quick format is fine, that's what I always do. And then we just come down here and click Start. We hit OK, it warns us that it's going to erase everything. Obviously, if you have something important on that SD card, you should probably save it somehow and get it off of the disk before you do this. But we'll hit OK, and it'll format it real quick. Usually takes just a couple seconds. That's all done now. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to take that file that we downloaded. I had it right in my downloads, and so I copied it, and now I'm going to paste it into the card that we just formatted. And so now it's going to be in that card, and that's all we have to do on the computer. We can go ahead and close out of it and take the card out of the computer. Alright, so we have our SD card here with that little file. It was a .bin file, and it's loaded onto the SD card. So now we're going to take that SD card and put it in the camera. Now at this point, all you have to do is power up the camera and it'll update automatically. Now this is where we have a difference from when the camera was running on battery power. If it had a battery in it and the battery was charged, we could actually boot up the camera and run it on battery power and do playback, even record some, or just turn it on for this particular reason that we want to turn it on to update it. With the supercapacitor installed, you can't do that. The only thing the supercapacitor does is store your settings. So what we have to do instead is power this thing up with some external power source. We can use the plug in the car that we always use to run it, or what I'm going to do is I have one of these little things that you carry around to charge your phone. So I plug the USB cable into it, and I'm just going to plug it into the camera here. So we'll see that our camera comes on, and it should update the firmware automatically. So at this point the firmware has been automatically updated, and so all we want to do is just use the power button to manually shut it off one time. And that's it. Our firmware is up to date. Alright, so at this point the project's pretty much complete here. Definitely it wasn't really difficult. If I did it all in one step without filming it, probably would have taken me about 20-25 minutes tops. But there you go. The only other thing I can do with this is I can set the time on it. And so I'll just mention, anytime you change anything important like settings of any kind, you just want to make sure that you power it off manually instead of just cutting power to it. So for example, let's say that I just got done resetting the date and the time or changing the length of the video clips. What I would do is instead of cutting the power to it, I just use the power button here to shut it off. And that'll ensure that the settings are saved. And then once you do that, you can just operate it as it's now designed to do. So if it's filming here and then I just go ahead and unplug the cable, it's just fine. You unplug your cable, the camera shuts off, it saves that little clip, but it'll still maintain your clock and your date and all your other settings. People will be probably asking me what's the reason for doing this, and at least for me the reason is just that I don't have to keep replacing batteries. Lithium batteries, they only last so long and you have to keep replacing them. So for me this works fine. I have no problem with not being able to operate the camera on battery. So for me it's just replace the capacitor once and not have to worry about it again. as far as I'm concerned, this thing will probably, maybe something else will break, but this battery will probably last, or rather this supercapacitor probably last forever. And it does pretty good. If you're counting down, when you shut this thing off, you lose about 2 seconds or so. And unfortunately, I didn't check before to see how much you lost. That might have been the way it always was. I'm not sure. But after power is cut to it, the video, you lose about 2 seconds. But that's maybe the only disadvantage. And again, it might have always been like that. I'm not sure. But I think that's going to do it for this video. I don't really have anything else to add. So hopefully it was helpful. Hopefully it was interesting. And if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments. Thanks for watching, tubes. Don't forget to subscribe.